Okay, we're going to start by taking a detailed look at our M28 Civil Guard rifle. Now, as we followed through this whole series of videos, the Finns were experimenting with barrels and relining and that, so they finally decided, and the Army decided first, and they developed what was called the M27. I don't have one to compare side by side. But basically the only difference between the M27 and the M28 that the Civil Guard adopted is the Army adopted it first. The Civil Guard looked at it and they didn't like some of the features, so the only changes are barrel bands, the nose cap, which has importance in where the bayonet mounts. So what they decided to do, we're going to keep the 91 and we have to do something with the barrels. So what they did, they made new barrels. Okay, they shortened the barrel and made it thicker and heavier. Okay, so it shortened the length of the weapon, gave them the accuracy they wanted, took that long, thin, wispy barrel, that, the vibration and everything, making a more accurate, more rugged gun. And the big changes were, they made new barrels, they're shorter and heavier. They changed the front sight. They changed the front sight and they changed how they mounted the bayonet. The socket bayonet was gone. Now they're going to use a knife bayonet that locks on with a lug, like most standard bayonets of the time. But here's the thing to remember: the Finns are not producing a new gun. They are recycling parts from M91s. They're modifying the stocks to this new configuration. They're adding a barrel, and the Model 27 and 28 are still using the old Kolyov style leaf sight. Even though they did kind of modify it a little and made some changes, I'll discuss that when we take a closer look at the gun. They're still using the sling mounting points as is because they're refurbishing the stock. And there are some sub-variations in both guns because they experimented with either adding sling mounting points, or I believe the 27s had some other type of sling arrangement or something added on, but I don't have any examples, and for all these little sub-variants you can go back to Mosin.net and find a photograph of it. So that's what they ended up with, a modified 91 to their liking. And the further models that follow basically are just going to be fine-tuning of this until I believe they end up with the Model 39, which was the last one. And that is where I believe the stocks were newly manufactured, because they radically changed the stock. They have a semi-pistol grip and made the butt stock heavier and thicker. Okay, but at this point with these models here, I'll go over the changes, we'll look at it and look at the markings. Basically they took 91 action. So bear in mind, this whole time in this whole rifle series, I believe the Finns never really manufactured a receiver, bolt, trigger guard, magazine. They recycle them because the ones on this gun still have the Russian markings on them. Okay, so it's kind of interesting that these people built an upgraded, modernized version of a rifle system and really just reworked 91s and I believe eventually 91 30s that they got their hands on, but they've never manufactured the receiver, the bolt, or trigger mechanism. Okay, and they kept this gun in service from the end of World War I, and they were using them till the 60s. So let's take a look at this M28 and we'll look at the markings and the features of it. Alright, so M91 action, trigger, magazine, trigger guard, magazine housing, receiver. Now the receiver does still have, they even didn't scrub it off, WN on there is the only marking I can see from the top. and it has a 91 buttstock, which has been, reused. Has the splice. We'll kind of look at that closer when we take it apart, and you can see where this has been repaired and remodified. Okay, and then they, I believe they had to make new hand guards. But the big change was down here on the end. And once we get this and the 91 apart, we'll show the length of the barrel and the diameter. But it was the front sight. Now this thing has protective ears, and it is lined up, pressed on, soldered, and then soldered onto the barrel. And I think that screws what helps hold it down to where they solder it. And this front sight blade, even though we can't see it, is dovetailed in there and can be adjusted for windage. Alright? So what the difference between the 27 and the 28 is the guard didn't like the bands, which are them clamshell style bands that survived, I think, on the 39. And if you look, there's something, once we get this stock off, we'll look at the nose cap. And there's your bayonet lug. Now where the importance of this nose cap come in is the M27s were having problems that when you lunged with a bayonet or something, this thing would twist, crack the stocks, and they had problems with it. So the difference between this and the Army version is the Civil Guard wanted a Mauser style band that had a screw through the center to hold the barrel bands on to the stock. And there is a variation of a tapered front or something, I'm not quite sure. Something about the handguard was kind of modified in changing this here on the nose cap and this end of the stock. Now when we go back to the rear sight, this one has the Kolyov still style rear sight. We got our markings there, like on the 91s, but they took the time to grind off all the old markings there on this. And this is not adjustable. Now there are sub variations where they went and modified and added a piece and cut this sight to have a piece of sheet metal thing on there where you can adjust for windage on the rear sight. Okay, but this early one doesn't have that. There's one little mark down in there. And as we look, you still have, I believe, the Russian, this camera doesn't want to focus for me at all. Down in here, the Russian markings are still here, and I believe it still has the Izhevsk markings on the spring, and our meters on our rear sight. So now we'll look at the barrel markings. Okay, I'm going to have to hold this back because it won't focus up close. So we have the, I believe it's a SY markings, which stands for Civil Guard. Okay, and then there's the D stamped on there, and that D represents that this barrel had the chamber reamed out for D ball. And we'll get more into that when we talk about ammunition. But most of these guns will have that D there, and that's what it signifies. And the SY is how we know this is a Civil Guard gun. They have the barrels marked. Now the barrels were made by SIG. And underneath this other serial number here, it says that in there. SIG's name is, their written logo is SIG's company. Now, on this side of the barrel, we have an S and a 5-digit serial number. This is the Civil Guard serial number, and this designates, this was added on extra, and it's a Civil Guard thing, and it tells what district this gun went to, because they had their own serial number range for the districts. And also, if we can see inside the finger groove, there's number 3. Hold on a second. There's a number 3 stamped in there. Now, these stocks that were reworked from 91 stocks are supposed to have another symbol, 3 letters in a circle, and this one doesn't have that on there. So let's go and look at the markings on the other side of the barrel. Alright, on this side of the barrel we have a little small O and a serial number applied by SIG. Okay, so the gun's got 2 serial numbers. There's a little E in brackets, which is an acceptance stamp or proof, and we have the SA in the box. Now, I don't know if all of them, Finnish Army property, the mark's there. So, and there was one other, okay, on the top here, where the S, there's, let me turn this around and we'll look at, I forgot to go over the S on the other side of the barrel. It's kind of hard to see the stance. There's an S, which is part of the Civil Guard serial numbers, and then a KF, I believe, and another little stamp here, which may be another stamp in terms of a district or area where the Civil Guard was. So now I'm going to take this apart and we'll take a look and we're going to take a look at the gun disassembled, take a closer look at it and compare it with the disassembled M91. Okay, here on the top we have our M91 barreled receiver, and on the bottom we have the barreled receiver of the M28. Now, as you can see, they really didn't, they used the same receivers, same trigger mechanism, but this is an original 91 trigger mechanism, and you can see they did something to the trigger. They modified it a little. Ground on it. It's got a different shape to it. Been fooled with a little. Now they said something about placing springs in there. Let me see something. There is no little coil spring in this, so I'm not quite sure what that modification was, but it was something that the Finns did. But obviously they kind of reshaped the trigger. That's about the only thing I see modified there. And now we'll take a better look at the SIG barrel scroll. Part of it is underneath the stock line there. There's a better look at that. And also there is in a little square number 27. I can't remember exactly what the significance of that is. So as for the barrel, as we see the barrel is stepped. I didn't realize that. So you have your heavy shank, you have a heavier step here to this point, and then it is heavier in diameter all the way down to the end to where the front sight mounts. So they replaced the barrels with a heavier step barrel, which, like I discussed, that's your solution to accuracy and the shortcomings of that long, thin barrel that heats up and barrel resonance and everything else. Also the length. The original barrels are a little over 30 inches long, while these I think are at 26 inches in overall length. So the barrels were shortened. And if you look also to the rear sight, even though they've reused it, they had to shorten it to get it to fit on that other shank here. And I think they even, you can see where they cut grooves into it and mounted it a little different. So they had to modify the two of them, shorten the height and rework it to get it to fit on this new barrel. So that was another thing that they did, I just noticed here. The site was reworked. And here we have our new front sight. And like I said, they say that these were pressed on and then soldered in place on there. And the importer's mark. Now let's look at the stocks. Okay, looking at the upper handguards, we have the M91 at the top and then the one for the M28 at the bottom. Now I'm wondering if they reworked these handguards. It looks like the wider piece is spliced into this somehow, and there's still that radius in the bottom from the narrower groove. They're about the same width, but I believe they went and reworked the upper handguards to make these new ones. If you look at it, you see in the bottom of this one here, there's still the radius for the smaller barrel where they had to open that up. And then it looks like that it's spliced somehow with the wider piece on there, glued on and then fitted. Let's flip them over. Which, if you look at them, that's altogether possible. Cutting it down, that wood is thin over here on this. And then you can see where this was probably glued on or laminated on there. It's a definite possibility. I don't know for sure. It's just I noticed that when I took them apart, they're almost the same damn length. So that's interesting. Okay, now looking at the stocks. Got the Setstroyetsky M91 up top and the Finnish M28 here on the bottom. Now, I don't know if it's reworked or not. It doesn't have the stamp on it. And if you notice, it kind of has a bit of a pot belly to it in this area. Where that doesn't quite look the same. As you see, the length is a lot different. But we do have the area where this has been spliced in here. So, and also there's that repair right there. Looks like was filled in. And then here's this nose cap I was talking about. This is the thing, a lot of controversy about that. This is an older style. There was another style, I'm not quite sure, they said wraps around or something, other than just being a plate screwed on there. They had a lot of problems with this nose cap assembly. It was a sticking point. And when the bayonet lug or bayonet was affixed, it would crack or break or something. So that's what the inside of this stock looks like. It has a little bit of a, I don't know if there was a knot in there or what. But then that's where our finger splices come in. Here and here. Which is actually a pretty good job there. And of course we look in, we're shimmed. We're shimmed inside. But this one has no shims on the bottom. So I'm not quite sure if that's an overhauled stock or not. But it fits the finished description of, or you know, what most you find on most of these guns is these splice stocks. And some people say they did that and reconstructed these because of the temperatures in the winter, the huge sub-zero temperatures. It helps to keep the stock from splitting or cracking. That was one explanation of why they also did it too. Okay, there's one thing I forgot, is if you look here, there's this little chamfer on the stock. This was something just on the, or this was something, a point they changed from the M27 to the 28 is they did this so it's easier to get this barrel band off when you have to take it off. That was another key point. See, it's these little details that changed everything. Now, this is the model 28. There is a model 2830. And basically, the changes are, they changed this rear sight. They changed it with the other type. It's more like a modern slider. And they got rid of this weird Koleov sight, this leaf style. And the other sight is adjustable, I believe, from for windage on the back. It'll look totally different. It's more flat. They did change also the front sight on the 2830. They did something with the blade where it moves at an angle quite similar to the Swiss style sight you'll find on the Schmidt-Rubens. So they did a little improvement on the front sight blade and how it adjusts for windage. They totally changed this rear sight, something newer and more modern. And I've heard that they did things to the trigger, but I don't have that modification here. There's no little coil spring in there. They did some work on the trigger. So those were basically the modifications that were done, which would make it a 2830. And the Civil Guard kind of, they were successful with this. And I believe because they were all successful, that's what, like when we went in the video, they had their buying spree where they were buying all these M91s from all these foreign countries and were manufacturing or refurbishing and making their own design. As time progressed, again, something about that up in the front there, that plate over on the front of the stock. That was another modification. They were kind of slight, but I mean the big one was that rear sight. You can tell the difference, obviously. And the Army was going on, and the Army and the Civil Guard were two different organizations. And the Army was trying to make changes to the 27, and a lot of them didn't quite work out. But in the end, they ended up with the Model 39. And that's what the Finns went with, and that's basically how it is. It's basically small modifications in the sights, and I think the 39s, they made the stocks because the stocks had the semi-pistol grip, which the M91s don't. And the strange thing about this old model, if the user wanted to have it upgraded to the new sights and more or less turn it in to a Model 2830, he could have had that done, but obviously he didn't for some reason. So that's my look at the Model 28 and how it fits into the progression. I wish I had the other variants and models to compare side by side, but I don't. And I hope you enjoyed this series. And now, before we bring it up, we're going to discuss that D on there and the ball ammo. I'm going to talk about 7.62 by 54R ammo in the next group of videos.